Fishing for trout in areas that include the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness was discussed during the 2024 legislative session at the Capitol in St. Paul. Some changes coming in the future, the near future, for some of the trout regulations. Joining us now for more on this is Shannon Fisher. He is the Fisheries Population Monitoring and Regulations Manager for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Shannon, appreciate your time.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's talk about the changes. And when we say change, actually, it's more of a clarification from the statute, the law, if you will, about how trout are already being sort of protected, or the seasons for trout, if you will, here in Minnesota. And that includes definitely the Boundary Waters. So when we talk about fishing, ice fishing, canoe fishing in the Boundary Waters for trout, let's start with ice fishing, though. I think sometime around January 1 and until March 31st. Interestingly enough, the statute didn't read that way. It could have actually been, if you followed the law, fishing for them January 1 to October 31. Tell us what the clarification is, Shannon.
Sure. Well, we manage the lake trout populations, in a way that with seasons that we think are biologically prudent. And so it's also a safety issue for anglers being on that late ice and that early spring ice. And so we've had this break in the season where we've had this ice season in the winter, and then we have an open water season, spring and summer. And the statute read for lake trout from January 1 through October 31st. And so there was a disconnect between the management that we were applying or implementing for lake trout versus what the statute actually said. And so with that, we wanted to make a change, get a clarification, make sure everybody was on the same page. And so we asked for a change, and it was ultimately approved.
Mm-hmm. So now the law will read what the seasons reflect, which is what people have become accustomed to sometime around January 1 to March 31st. Starts again when the fishing season begins in mid-May of this year. I think it was on the 11th, and ends for lake trout on September 30th. For stream trout and inland lakes, that's October 31st.
That's correct. What the change did was it basically allowed us to establish the seasons in rule. And so therefore it gave us a little bit more flexibility in terms of getting those seasons set. And the Commissioner of Natural Resources now has the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's talk about another change that's included in this legislation, and that's, as it was currently written, or at least enforced, was on the Saturday closest to January 1, fishing for lake trout and stream trout and inland lakes entirely inside the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness line would begin sometime around January 1. And then outside, it would begin sometime close to January 15th. Now that's been changed. Now it's going to start January 1 inside the BWCA, and it's going to start January 15th outside. So no more of this like closest to Saturday. It's going to be on the 1st. And however, Shannon, I want to point out that this year on the 1st, or next year rather, on 2025, the 1st is on a Wednesday and the 15th is also on a Wednesday. So it would be middle of the week if that's the way you're moving forward.
Case, yep. Now, just to clarify, this rule change or this is still in the process. And so the actual wording that is currently in place for the start of the opening of those seasons inside and outside of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area are still in place. We haven't necessarily made any changes yet. We are working on it where, again, like the Boundary Waters, it's January 1st, except when January 1st lands on a Sunday, Monday, or a Tuesday, then it's the Saturday closest to January 1st, or something along those lines. And it's very confusing for anglers. It's confusing for us as the people who manage it. And so what we are proposing is that we move that to a solid, firm date of just January 1st. And then it wouldn't necessarily land on a Saturday. It would land on, whatever day of the week January 1st happens to land on. And then we would do the same thing with the January 15th date for the opener for lakes outside of the Boundary Waters. Instead of it being the Saturday closest to January 15th, we would just open it up on January 15th and be done with it.
Okay. So, but you don't know for sure if that's going to be the case in 25. It might be, though.
It's possible. I would say, given the process that it takes to get a new rule change in place, I would say it's more likely looking out to 2026 than it is 2025.
Mhm. All right. Well, very good information. Those are dates that people who go up there that they definitely are going to want to be aware of this and know about that. So we'll do our best to keep people informed, and DNR usually does a good job about letting people know about this as well. So when we talk about this legislation, I know the DNR, when it came to like the change with crossbows recently, people were kind of going, why is the legislature getting involved in this type of ruling? What about the DNR, the agency, and the anglers and hunters in that case with crossbows? But it sounds like the DNR was more in tune or kind of working with the legislature on this.
Yeah, this was a request that came from us to the legislature to make this correction. We wanted to make sure, like I said, that we were operating consistently with what the statutes asked of us, and we wanted to make sure that we had the appropriate authority to make the rules that we do to set the seasons.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then just lastly, Shannon, and perhaps related or somewhat unrelated to the change itself and these rules we've been talking about, you're the fisheries population monitoring and regulations manager, as I said. So fisheries population, I'm wondering about lake trout in the boundary waters, just some general observations, how they're doing and what you guys are thinking about in terms of lake trout in the boundary waters, such a beloved species.
Well, in all honesty, I would have to probably defer that question to our regional and area staff up there. They know those resources much better than I do. What I can tell you is that there are some populations, just like any other population. Some are doing quite well for themselves. Some are struggling. Particularly those lake trout populations that are on the southern portion of the range. We're starting to see warming lake conditions. We're starting to see more invasive species showing up. And unfortunately, some of the stocking efforts that we've put forth to try to bolster some of these lake trout populations have not been very effective. So we're in the process of kind of reevaluating our brood source or our stocking source. And we may try some different things in the future. But again, I think we are seeing a shift in some of our populations, and we'll have to address that through different management actions in the future.
Mm-hmm. All right. And we do talk pretty regularly with E.J. Isaac here in Grand Marais, the fisheries supervisor, and Matt Weberg over at the Finland office and so forth as well. So, all right. Well, thanks for this update. I know getting clarification out, I think some of the regional media here in Northeast Minnesota were saying that it's more about this is now the way it's going to be, this continuous season that starts January 1 and rolls to October 31. That's not the case.
That's not the case, no.
Yeah. Keep it in mind that it's the way it has been, and they're just changing the legislation to reflect those seasons. So appreciate this update. We're talking with Shannon Fisher. Thanks a lot, Shannon.
You're very welcome. Thank you.